from CBS News, 7 p.m. Eastern Wartime. Robert Trout reporting. The Japanese have accepted our terms fully. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the end of the Second World War.
From all over the globe, surviving warriors came home with a desire for normal life. They'd left for war untested. They came back armed, no longer with weapons, but with new knowledge and new energy that would make normal life something altogether different from what they had left. Decorated Major W.A. Sherman returned to Orange, Virginia. If his neighbors learned of the end of the war listening to Robert Trout on CBS, they heard the broadcast from a radio station in a nearby city or town. Broadcast radio had not yet come to Orange. Tired of war, Sherman came back to his hometown wanting to support and build his community. He'd also have to make a living. For the rest of his working life, Welford Sherman would make that living at W.A. Sherman and Company, a family heating, plumbing, and electrical business. In the Army, Sherman had helped to develop radar. In the process, he'd learned a lot about electronics and antennas. In 1948, he built an antenna for the Sherman Company building. Its tower was 90 feet tall. The antenna drew in broadcast signals from Richmond and Washington, each more than 70 miles away. Soon, Sherman was amazing his customers with that newfangled picture-transmitting invention, television. That big tower outside his business attracted a lot of attention, not only from would-be buyers, but also the curious.
Some man came through town and he saw that antenna and he wondered what it was, so he came in and asked me. He was Fred Allman, who was head of the radio station in Harrison. He finally said, did we want to build a radio station, or did I want to build a radio station in Orange? And I said, well, I think it'd be great if we could.
But I remember Welford coming up to us, I think that's what happened. He said, we want a radio station if we can get one. And the meetings will be at the courthouse. And we met with the FCC representative. And I think he wanted to know whether the town was willing to support a radio station.
Still a small, rural courthouse town as it had been since before the American Revolution, Orange was home to Sherman and 2,500 other Virginians.
It was just a small town, that's all. I guess the population at that time, in the early 40s, might have been 2,500.
I was building a television station in Baltimore at the time. Then he came and said, would you be interested in that station? I want to start up in Orange, Virginia. We located the studio and transmitter and everything at the DeVivi restaurant.
The building was not being used. He had built it, but it wasn't being used. And so he was willing to rent it. There was room out behind to put the antenna.
But even with the new real estate secured, there was still a problem. The Federal Communications Commission worried that the new radio station in Orange would interfere with a station on the same frequency, WINX, up in Washington. Sherman remembered the signal tests to assure them otherwise took a long time. But with that time, he worked to secure funding for the venture, which would come to be named in honor of Orange County's most famous native son. Sherman invited Main Street businessmen in Orange to join him in the new James Madison Broadcasting Corporation.
I remember going around selling the stock. If the people had the money, they were glad to do it. They thought it was good for the town. And there may have been one or two that turned us down.
But I think everybody was that did do it, the business people, thought it would be a good thing for the town.
Good for the town became a theme in Sherman's life. Whether building a radio station or rescuing the President Madison Inn from the Wreckers' Ball, his neighbors remember him for his service to the town of Orange.
Welford has done what he could for Orange for a long time. His efforts with the radio station are that same sort of thing. Doing something within the community, Hopefully it's going to be an economic success, but even so, it's, no matter what, it is worth doing.
Welford is probably our most interviewed, our most written up citizen in the community. And I interviewed him for my Greatest Generation book, and he's in there. I think he was venturesome and ambitious.
And I was in on the launching of WJMA in 1949.
Of course, we wouldn't have any TV then to speak of. And right after the war, you see, everybody tried to establish their business or improve their old businesses if they had one.
At noon on Saturday, September 10th, 1949, WJMA signed on the air for the first time. While the station sent out its new 250-watt signal to the people of Orange, station manager Art Livick and landlord Al DeVivi cut a cake in celebration.
I do remember we had a formal ceremony, and all the stockholders and the dignitaries were there. I was assistant manager, announcer, continuity writer, jack of all trades. I did a little sales. We were very small. I'm trying to remember if we had a staff of 5 or 6 people. I'd say that's about all we were working with. Joe Trevette, morning man, Boyd Schellinger, Ann Butler, who started out as our receptionist, and that was her primary job. But Art very wisely decided she had a good voice, which she did, and put her on the air on a limited basis. She was not a regular announcer. She did some women's programming, that some announced some commercials. Sunday nights, as long as they ran the open house, that was a command performance. Everybody showed up. That was fun. The place would be filled. As I recall, she had, I hate to say items of local gossip, but social items of local interest.
The news, of course. And we had some musical things, mostly recordings. A lot of it were recordings from we sold records at that time, amongst other things. And a lot of them were my records.
Then it was on to the business of running the new station. Livick was busy selling advertising, overseeing staff, and producing programs.
Arch had a program he called The Old Timer, which was very popular. And he imitated somebody called The Old Timer. And he didn't have a bit of trouble selling time.
The Old Timer, who became so popular the people of Lahore, Virginia, voted him mayor.
WJMA was a very locally oriented station.
Art Livick left in 1952, and Alfred Walthall became the general manager. Under Walthall, WJMA began broadcasting Orange High School football games in 1954. In 1956, 26 of the other original investors sold their interest to their partner, Orange businessman Woodbury Ober.
He was an unusual man. He came here and he bought an old rundown farmhouse. It was never elegant. He made it elegant, gave it a fancy name, Elmwood, and involved himself in the town.
From his elegant farmhouse, Ober became involved in the business of Orange. Ober moved to Virginia after service in naval intelligence in Panama during World War II. He thought life in the rural Virginia countryside would be more healthful than living in Chicago, where he'd had a career in insurance at Marsh & McLennan. Known as a modest man, Ober brought his business experience and a quiet command authority to the radio station.
Until you mentioned something the other day, I never knew he had anything to do with the radio station. But I'm not surprised to learn that he did.
On first impression, he was the consummate banker. He was direct, polite, businesslike, smart, really smart. And it wasn't until you had been around him for a while that you realized how much he was interested in people and interested in where he lived. And that's where the radio station and the other things that he did came from. But initially what you saw was a professional, very competent banker.
He had a true feeling for community, and he wanted to do things for and with the community, and he did.
I realized that what he was doing was building community. And the station was one of the things, one of the ways he was building community. Things that you built your community around, a newspaper, a radio station. And the station was definitely a community builder. And it worked.
He did things modestly. He did not want his name in the paper. He did not want the brass plaque put on the wall. These weren't things that he was interested in. He's just a nice man.
I didn't see very much of him, but I remember him telling Bob, he hired Bob Wagner. Bob came here from Zanesville, Ohio, and he was a terrific sportscaster. But I remember Mr. Ober telling Mr. Wagner that Red would be his sportscaster, would do the football games.
John Mahaney was WJMA's sales manager in early 1957 when the station struggled financially due to limited small-town sales opportunities. But by the time he left WJMA a year later, the station was in the black. Under Ober, WJMA became a training ground for aspiring young radio people. In 1953, 18-year-old Ron Landry began his broadcasting career at WJMA. From Orange, he worked in 5 different cities and Armed Forces Radio. Finally settling in Los Angeles, he became a sitcom writer for shows such as Benson, The Red Fox Show, Flo, and Gimme a Break. It was Ron Landry who encouraged high schooler Red Shipley to follow his love of radio.
He was the one who told me, hey, if I can do it, you can do it. You got a voice for it. And, if you don't mind working hard and working in dumps like this, it was a dump too.
Like many who would follow, Shipley found a career, almost a calling, at WJMA.
I started in high school because the Orange and Blue Review, we were on WJMA, and I asked to do the country part. And I hung out there all day because I loved radio. I never wanted to be anything other than a disc jockey in my whole life. At 5 o'clock I guess it was a news block, 15 minutes of news, and then Organ Melodies with Jesse Crawford. And then I played an hour of this, then I played an hour of that, then I played an hour of this, and then I played the classical hour. Oh, God, that must have been something. The house lights dim and the conductor lays his baton, and we hear Igor Stravinsky in a Firebird suit. It was just about that bad. It didn't take long for him to move in the mornings. I worked a night shift. I couldn't do the football games, could I? Do the night shift, so in September they probably moved me in the mornings. Then I was a morning man the rest of my life. But I liked it, I was used to getting up early.
One morning I woke up and about 9 o'clock turned on the radio and nothing was blank. And I tried calling the station several times, always busy. And finally I just got dressed and went on in to see what was going on, if the place was broken down or what. Got there and there sat Red just spinning records and reading commercials and doing his normal chatting. had never thrown the switch on the transmitter. Had been there since 6 o'clock, probably got in at 5.
Red Shipley moved on from Orange, but he never left radio. He went on to become the host of the popular Stained Glass Bluegrass show in the nation's capital on WAMU Radio. Shipley eventually retired from full-time Washington radio and moved back to his hometown. In 2006, the Bluegrass Music Association named him Broadcaster of the Year. Even while suffering from cancer, he continued with the Bluegrass show, which originated at WJMA and was simulcast with WAMU, a rare joint venture between public radio and a commercial broadcast station. Shipley ran the program for 25 years, until shortly before he died in 2007. Even with talent, creative thinking, and hard work, selling radio advertising in a small town was tough. In the spring of 1957, Ober approached Don Heine with the idea of merging WJMA with Heine's WINA radio in Charlottesville.
I think he came with a direct idea of merging the two stations. He thought it would be a good idea and we could sell the two markets at the same time to advertisers, which is certainly possible, and we tried that. And we did have a rate card that covered both WINA and WJMA in Orange.
Now tied in with the big city radio station in Charlottesville, population 65,000, Ober hoped that more business would come WJMA's way, but there just weren't that many advertisers, and radio ads didn't command a high price in those days. Bill Little remembers there wasn't a lot of money available for ad writers or fancy production either.
And the first day I signed on at WJMA, I well remember, because Kane Furniture had an order for 100 ads that day. 50 cents an ad, that was a special. And I looked at the schedule, and I signed on at, a couple minutes of 6. And from 6 to 6:15, there were 3 Kane Furniture ads. And from 6:15 to 6:34 Kane Furniture ads. He liked to be in prime time. And 4 furniture ads between 7 and 7:50, And there was 1 piece of copy. So I learned pretty darn soon, you better start ad-libbing, or you're not going to do anything in this, because you can't just hold up the copy and read it, and then I just couldn't do it.
It's the type of thing, it's like a movie, you might say. If you don't get the money that day, you're not going to get it.
So one day they sent me up, and this was when Claude White was the manager, because I remember they sent me up to Falconer Hardware. And 1-minute ads were $1.50 at the time on WJMA. It was an old store, typical old hardware store. Had 2 electric lights in it, one on one side, one on the other. And when I went and introduced myself to old Mr. Falconer, Johnny Falconer's dad, he was very polite, and he said, well, let's go over here. And he turned the light off over there on one side of the store. And while we walked over to where it was, dark, then he turned the light on over there. And by gosh, I sold him 2 1-minute ads. 50% co-op, they were $1.50 each. He spent $3. I made a 15% commission out of that, 45 cents.
And those were the dying days of network. We had network all day long and evening. I think we still had some soap operas. We had some drama in the evening. I cannot tell you what they were, but I know I did no evening programming at all. We had all network feeds yet in late 58, early 59, and of course NBC News on the hour.
In the evenings, I was playing big band stuff, which I liked at the time. And that's mostly what there were. Bob Wagner had a show of big band sounds. I think it was an hour of that, and it was some rock and roll stuff.
I went down to I think there was something called the Eagle Store, if I'm not mistaken. And then there was Sparks Grocery. But they were the only 2 places in town that sold records. So I decided we were 1340 on the dial, so it would be the top 13 at 1340. Now, I know that the sales were not strong enough to do any kind of a definitive list. I know I had to be fudging because even the number one record, they wouldn't have sold 10 copies. So how authentic that list was, I don't know. And I would simply type that on the typewriter on a Friday or whatever and get a copy down to those two stores. But I thought it was something that hadn't been done, and maybe that would be a little bit of a hook to get the young people. This is the number one record in Orange. Sounds good. Whether it really was or not, I'm not sure.
Well, what we tried to do, I think, was duplicate what we were doing here in Charlottesville. As I say, we never had, I don't recall that we ever had a local news service on WJMA that originated in Orange.
Well, as you think about it, we were the window to the world at that time to Orange.
You couldn't hear the AM at night, almost out of the town limits when you went to 250.
The light bulb-sized radio signal dismayed many listeners who could barely hear the station at the town's limits. Heine decided it was time to move the radio station out of Al DeVivi's restaurant.
As I remember, I was a little unhappy with the location, and I don't think we were too close to the chapo that ran the motel. I had to get a location where I could cover more area.
When the radio station moved from its original location at the DeVivi restaurant on Route 15 south of Orange to new studios on Spicer's Mill Road, the daytime power increased from 250 watts to 1,000 watts.
That's exactly what I did, and moved the tower.
Heine designed and built a new 4-room broadcast station. Long before the nation went green, WJMA utilized its new higher transmitter wattage, now the power of an electric frying pan, as an alternate energy source.
Because in those days, transmitters threw out a good amount of heat, so we put the transmitter in such a so we could heat the building when it was running. I remember that.
The tower up and the move made into its new brick building on Spicer's Mill Road, WJMA Radio soon found itself with yet another new owner.
Somehow, and I can't remember how it was, we got word that the JMA was for sale. We bought the station in, I guess it was the summer of 61. All I wanted to do was to find out how a radio station worked. I had been over in Fredericksburg, as I was an announcer and a program director at WFVA. Marion and I had thought we would be there for about 3 or 4 years, learn how it works, sell the station to somebody else, and move up. And there we were, 25 years later. We still hadn't done it.
I remember Arch being very good with his dollar, stretching it, getting the most out of it, very thrifty. I would get my paycheck in an envelope that had been mailed to him, that had been cut off on the end with a pair of scissors. The check would be down inside, and there was a staple in it. So he was saving money on envelopes, postage, whatever he could. Very thrifty. Arch was always very fair, a great guy. I enjoyed working for him.
I thought what I really wanted to do was not to come in there and call for a clean house and start with a blank piece of paper. I would just take what we had working and see how it was going. I wanted to maintain as much continuity as I could, I think. The main thing I wanted to do was to keep NBC going, which we were able to do for a while, but with our financial situation being kind of parlous, I just decided we had to drop NBC. I told people that they were going to have a new and exciting listening experience, which was us straggling through the news, doing it live, but we did it all right.
Arch is not the most technical person in the world. And to see him running a radio station and being sort of at the mercy of it.
I came back and went to work for Arch at some point in time as the engineer at Spicer's Mill. And I was in trouble from day one when something would happen to the transmitter because I really wasn't all that good with transmitters. And my father was the resource for me because he had all these parts and pieces that he would buy used and surplus. Had a whole basement full of stuff, and we'd go down and I'd call him. It would be an old relay. It would not contact properly, and he'd have a junk one back there. And Art said this, and I said it many times. My father always said that I was certified but not qualified. He was qualified, not certified. So we made a pretty good team, and we kept Arch on the air there for a few years out of his junk box.
But we really relied on Roy Hager. And Roy often said about me and my first-class license that you are certified but not qualified, I think was the way he put it. But Roy knew his stuff. He was an old ham operator.
Thrifty, frugal, words that his staff used to describe Harrison. They also knew he was genuinely interested in providing his listening audience with a quality product. Harrison put each available dollar to work to make sure his listeners knew where they could turn for reliable, accurate news and information.
Early on, I wanted to emulate WABC in New York or WMAL in Washington. These were the epitomes of broadcasting, the big leagues of radio. But after a while, I realized that our market was unique. We were filling a particular niche. There were things that we had to do in order to serve our community that that may have sounded kind of small town, but very important.
Arch wanted to provide a broad range of programs to reach many, many listeners in the community. In ratings terms, we may not have had a large quarter-hour audience. We didn't have a group of people who listened all the time. But over a week's time, we had a very large cumulative audience.
With the jazz scene, I'm not sure how many people listened to Mac Moore. But he loved it. He wanted to do it. And I said, fine, Mac, let's do it.
We did not narrowcast. Modern radio stations narrowcast. They pick a demographic, and that is their audience, 18 to 25-year-old males. We were broadcasting to our entire community. We were the hub of the community. We were acting very much like the internet works now for Orange and the environs. Information would flow into the radio station. We would disperse it. Our audience was everybody in the community.
There would be people who would listen only for news. They would listen to the newscast in the morning, and that was it. There were people who would only listen to high school football on Friday nights. There were people who would only listen to classical music or a jazz music program in the evening, and that's all they ever heard.
Perfectly tuned into the town. It just, there was a strong commitment to news and public affairs, and people in the town just embraced it. It was, it's radio like you don't hear anymore.
I remember people talking about what they heard on the station a lot. I remember, just downtown, or choir practice, somebody would say something about what they heard Art say on the radio, or some joke that Bill Little told in the morning. It was tied into the community in a way that is not as common to see nowadays.
Each of us, I think, that worked on the air were personal clearinghouses of information.
And as long as you could interact with the local people a lot, then radio was really a lot of fun for me. Because when I wasn't interacting with the announcers on the air and on the air stuff, I was interacting with the people in the sales. And it was the same thing. They knew me from the radio station, and it was just like old home week when you went. So I never pretended that I was a great salesman. I just happened to believe in what I was selling. And it worked. I can't ever remember anyone canceling their ads because they didn't work or because they didn't get results. Now, whether they could measure the results or not, I don't know. I mean, they seemed to, they stuck with us.
Every day was trying to improve the sound, your personal sound, the sound of the station. Ross Hunter and I call that fine-tuning, always fine-tuning the station, the sound, our own performance. Polishing a rock, it wasn't noticeable, but after the time, it was It was a smoother sound. Over the period of time that I worked at WJMA, the programming changed quite a bit. From the time I came to the time I left, it was really a very different station. But it took years to evolve.
There was one thing I always noticed at the county fair. There used to be the same comment every year that we went to the fair. We love the station, we love the people, but who picks out that music you play? And it didn't matter if we did pop, it didn't matter if we did rock, it didn't matter if we did country. And finally it struck me is people are listening to the station that don't like the music we play. So they gotta like something else. And I think it was the news, it was the personal involvement, and that we were what Arch Harrison wanted us to be, the informed friend.
I respectfully disagree. Very much like when people lose their luggage on an airline. People only tell you about the music they don't like when you play something they don't like. 95% of the time, people arrive at their destination with their luggage in hand. You never hear about it. 95% of the time, I think people found the music at least tolerable, maybe even enjoyable. It was when you played the Conway Twitty song or the Olivia Newton-John song that somebody didn't like. They'd tell you about it. You only heard from people generally when they were displeased.
You don't have to like the music because the music is a small part of the element. It's the person who's behind that mic. It's what the station is doing to contribute to the community and what the community's perception of the station is. We succeeded at that, and yes, it's not easy, but nothing that's worth doing, another Archism, nothing that's worth doing is easy. It takes a great deal of work, and it takes some struggle, and it just takes effort. But it pays off in the long haul.
At JMA, it seemed like there was more of an effort to create a well-rounded human being behind the microphone than there has been in some stations that I know of. I think it's one reason why JMA was successful, because people felt like they knew those guys. And that I think that creates a connection. And creating those moments is what radio is all about, those moments of connection.
And it never felt like work. I don't think anybody at the radio station, it's like we were stealing, this isn't work. This is fun, let's take on the UVA basketball team in a game of softball, it was just great fun. And on a hot day, we'd go out in the parking lot and do a live remote and fry an egg on the hood of Bill Little's car.
You remember the time we fried an egg out on my car out in the parking lot? We could do dumb things like that they were dumb, but they were fun. And people were listening and they would laugh about it.
Arch Harrison said we kind of blew it. Of course, it was live. You can't get it right. You always look back in retrospect and say we could have done it like this. But Arch said our reporter that was broadcasting the egg frying episode should have been Al Buman. You might say Arch put together an ensemble cast. People complimented the weaknesses of others. Where one person was not particularly good in some area, there would be other people who were really good in that. And you could feed off the other people, improve your skills. And the whole combination made a product that was greater than each of its parts.
One of the talents Arch Harrison had was bringing people together and really bringing out the best in people and creating a family situation where I think everybody in the station, from Ross Hunter to Phil Goodwin, who spent hours and hours and hours in the control room, to the people who did the news, to Pat Watson in front, the people who did the sales, Bill Little, everybody wanted to do the best they could, and they didn't want to let anybody else down. And it was a magical working situation.
You often hear about businesses wanting to be a family, but I think it was pretty much a family. People tended to know one another outside of work. I think there's a picture somewhere of the radio station picnic at Graves Mountain Lodge. And it's a huge crowd. There were a lot of people there.
It was a great place to work. It was fun, and the people were professional and so on and so forth, but they also were, it's been fantastic senses of humor.
It was a good place to start in radio, and I'm grateful to Arch for providing a good launch pad. He was a good man, and it was a good place to work.
I enjoyed it.
The only local newspaper serving Orange County, the Orange Review, came out weekly. To fill the need for a daily classified advertising medium, in October of 1963, WJMA began airing a program called Swap Shop.
Well, Swap Shop is pretty standard fare in small market broadcasting, but we had it ran forever.
Took phone calls, people buying and selling stuff.
And good morning, you're on Swap Shop.
I have for sale a 1968 Chevrolet van. It has a small V8 307, automatic transmission. It needs some body work, and we'll discuss the price.
All right.
And I'll be here all day. And my telephone number is 6.
The Craigslist of its day, I suppose. Over the years, Swap Shop developed into a half-hour program. And it was no problem at all to fill a half hour with phone calls from listeners. Very popular program. And again, another example of the sort of narrow programming that Arch did. Swap Shop was definitely not for everybody.
I did Swap Shop several times. It was a juggling act, and I don't recall enjoying it very much.
One of my regret, I never got to host Swap Shop, ever. And, I just think that's going to be a void in my life for as long as I can remember.
I mean, people today, they don't remember WJMA for the music, and they don't even remember that much for the news, but they sure remember it for Swap Shop. Swap Shop.
Foreshadowing Craigslist, Swap Shop wasn't the only arrow to the future at WJMA. Quiet innovation was part of the station's evolution.
We also were the pioneers in converting America to the metric system. We started giving the temperature in Celsius and then Fahrenheit because we knew that any day the standard would be adopted nationwide and we'd all have to buy a set of metric wrenches. We were way ahead, and in fact, we were driving an Edsel.
A speech major at George Washington University, Harrison had studied phonetics. His knowledge of the International Phonetic Alphabet enabled him to transcribe precisely his preferred pronunciation of words, especially troublesome place names for his staff.
Arch was a stickler on good grammar. He listened to them. He was in his car. He listened. If he heard a grammatical error, they were told about it.
And in Moscow, and Arch came in and said, "There are no cows in Moscow."
Had a last name that was spelled Taliaferro. Why that is pronounced Tolliver escapes me, but by golly, I learned.
It's Arab, not Arab.
Route, not route.
Not W. It is W.
It's can't. It's not can't.
Harass, which he always insisted be pronounced Harris, which I don't agree with, but I did it.
A time or two, I would play a record and say it was by Chet Atkins, and Arch would call up, madder than a wet hen, saying, I was making it sound like a bunch of hillbillies.
I can remember his calling me into the office early on and asking me to try to pay attention to my ing endings. He said, the way he put it was so Arch-like. He said, "I know you came from Georgia, but there's a G in Georgia, so you need to get these G's now that you're here in Virginia." So, that was classic Arch.
Oh, I corrected him once. Absolutely. He came in and tried to get me on the pronunciation of a town in Virginia. And I informed him that, even though I respected him greatly and I knew he was a great broadcaster, that I was a Spanish minor. I can speak Spanish, and I know that Bunavista is Buena Vista. And he said, "Phil, it is everywhere else but in Virginia. Here it's Buena Vista."
I think at the time I was calling it orange, like the fruit. But he was very patient. It was AHRANGE. Orange.
Orange, not orange.
Orange and not orange. I was thinking about that not long ago. It is AHRINJ, orange, not AWNJ, orange.
Getting the pronunciation tuned to Harrison's liking was only part of the challenge. Some listeners couldn't even hear the words broadcast from his station.
The only people that really complained a lot were the people that had trouble picking up our signal, because remember, we were AM only for a long time. And over at Lake of the Woods, in the far eastern part of the county, they couldn't pick us up in the morning. And they couldn't find out whether there was school or not.
Harrison wanted those well-formed words broadcast loud and clear into what became billed as the 5-county area. To increase WJMA's reach and attract listeners from farther afield, Harrison applied for an FM license from the FCC in 1971.
Arch decided to go FM, and he hired an engineer out of Charlottesville, Mike Coffey, because he knew I couldn't do it.
WJMA FM went on the air a couple of months after I started. When I arrived in August of 71, it was being worked on. Equipment was being bought and installed.
So I remember knocking out the cinder block and putting the door casing and shoving the transmitter up in there.
Now simulcast on AM and FM, WJMA's programming continued with sports, music, the swap shop, and news from the Associated Press. But there'd been an increase in the size of the staff, and the mountain of accumulated paper and vinyl records begged for room.
In around 1974, we were beginning to burst at the seams. We were just running out of space. So Arch decided to add on to the back of the building and more than double the space.
Always on the lookout for ways to serve the community of Orange and surrounding counties, with the station's increased physical size and new office space, Arch Harrison saw opportunity.
I tried from the beginning to have something that was of local interest all the time. And so that's the way we began with news, and it was a long time before we really got to full-time news. That wasn't until Chet Burgess graduated from Washington and Lee Journalism School. I had him come up as an intern.
We set out to see if a little radio station in a little tiny town could possibly generate enough news and information material to warrant, having a full-time person.
And I knew by the end of the first day there was, because he knew how to find the news. And so when he finished at Washington and Lee, he called me again. He said, "All right, I'm through. You had two choices. One is I go to work for the Roanoke newspapers or something, or I come to work for you."
And he said, "Well, let me talk to my accountant. I'll call you back tomorrow."
And I said, "Oh, Lord, how am I going to afford this high-priced college graduate journalism?" So I said, "Let me just think about it for a little bit." And I decided I could not afford to pass him up. I just couldn't do it. Man, that was a big salary, I think $125, and that was a week.
And he said, "We think we can do this. I could offer you $100 a week for 6 months. And at the end of that time, we'll have to look at news-related sales. If we've generated enough additional revenue to cover the expenses, then we'll make it permanent." So I turned down $165 a week, a company car, and an expense account with a landmark newspaper, and packed up, and we headed toward Orange.
But he just did a remarkably good job. Energetic as all get out.
Nobody told me you can't do that. Arch Harrison certainly never once criticized me for trying something new that didn't work. The fact that we were pioneering was really great. And I think that experience served me well when I came to Atlanta in 1980 and we were starting up CNN. Because again, we were in a situation doing something that no one had ever done before. And I got very comfortable at WJMA with inventing a way to do something that hadn't been done before. And that's what we did, especially most of the first couple of years, but even most of the first decade. of CNN was a process of invention, and having done it on a very small scale at WJMA, I didn't have any problem inventing on the fly.
Chet had given me my first opportunity as a stringer, and then of course he was offered the job with WTAR, and I was there and I was available, and I had maybe 3 Gordonsville Town Council meetings under my belt, and so they offered me the job. We had a whole team. It was Patricia McCarver, myself, Barbara Potter, Mitzi Clark. I mean, this was a team of people dedicated towards bringing you news from this small region of Virginia. That's a pretty good commitment for a small radio station. That's a heck of an investment in news. I mean, that gives you an idea of where Arch's head was at as far as the newspapers, as far as the radio station was concerned.
And I can remember my first session with Arch Harrison and his talking about what he did with Radio Orange and what his goals were and how he operated the station. And I thought, this is a man I want to be associated with.
She was one of those who did more in one day than the other person had done in the previous 7 months, it seems to me, and is a really fine reporter. And I remember checking up on her background. I called a news editor down at the Atlanta Constitution because she had been working as a stringer for them. And he said, you know, she has a passion for accuracy. I never had to check back up on anything she did because it was right. She was a super journalist, really a good writer and tenacious, but she'd have stuff on the air at 5 o'clock in the morning or 6 o'clock in the morning for the previous night's meeting somewhere. Was just wonderful. So we were really blessed with 2 talented news people, and we just never looked back. And then you've got that wonderful photograph of him and his harem. Oh, man. That was good times.
She and I had a great partnership because, first of all, I'm not a morning person, and she is. And so she volunteers to come down there at 5:30 in the morning. I'm saying, go for it, girl, because I'm looking at the back of my eyeballs at 5:30 in the morning. And so here we had, a news person on staff by 6 a.m. Unbelievable.
I can remember we clicked right away. He was doing Orange County, and then he did, of course, the major news programs, and I would feed him copy from Madison County and do some on-the-air work or recordings of the stories. And our styles were complementary.
It was absolutely an NPR-style news operation. I mean, think of it. I mean, we would have a full half hour of news from 12 to 12:30, most of it locally generated. A full half hour of news from 5 to 5:30 every evening.
This is the WJMA Evening Report, the Central Virginia Daily News for the 6th day in June, Friday. A wrap-up of today's news, sports, business news, and the weather. With the news, here's Phil Ober.
Good afternoon. The temperatures are 24 and 75 degrees at 5. In the news, Truman, Eisenhower, Nixon, and Ford all knew what it was like to have their presidential veto overridden by Congress. Today, President Carter found out, too.
I would do stories, that were 2.5 minutes long, news stories, 2.5 minutes long, with multiple actualities. And was never told, hey, you need to cut this back to a minute. Max. 30 seconds, that's all we need on it. Never was told that. Putting out feature stories that were 5 minutes in length. Putting out radio documentaries that lasted an hour.
I did Madison County. Willa Drinkwater, who was known then as Barbara Potter, did Louisa County, and she would cover their planning commissions. And what I remember she was really talented about was covering the issues that they had in Louisa County regarding growth. And then Mitzi Clark, who had worked for the Chicago Tribune before. She and her husband Champ moved to Greene County, where he was affiliated with the University of Virginia, and she started covering Greene County. And she loved Greene County as much as I loved Madison County.
And she had just a tremendous journalism background, having worked up on Capitol Hill in Washington for decades and retired to Greene County.
And her triumph was the day the courthouse blew up in Greene County. She was there and got hold of the only working telephone. And all of these high-tech, high-priced journalists were around there standing in line while Missy said, well, that's so. I thought, that's just fine. That is really enterprise reporting.
And we just started talking to as many people as we could, getting descriptions. How did this happen? What did you see? What records in there were destroyed? What are the plans for replacing the courthouse functions? The story just went all over the place.
You know, we won News Operation of the Year award a couple of times. Once under Chet's tenure, and at least once more under my tenure, and I think once again under Patricia McCarver's after I left and went to the newspaper. Arch was very supportive of the idea of taking time to make a good awards contest entry. I know that I was there 10 years and I won Best Feature of the Year every year that I was there because I just loved doing feature stories.
Lord, the news we ran, and Monday at 1 had a big chunk of public service content. We never tried to sell that. It was just there because it ought to be there. It's kind of nice if somebody wants to sponsor it or something, but mainly it ought to be there.
That Monday at 1 program, that won the Douglas Southall Freeman Award for Public Service Through Journalism several times.
We had a news department that I think could rival any local news department in any radio station anywhere.
You can get your news from around the world, but no one, from a variety of sources, but no one is going to give you the news from around the corner. And that's what we did. We gave the news from around the corner. And that's what made us feel so vital, I think, as far as the community was concerned.
As I recall, I was given totally free rein. And I think that was one of the reasons I loved it so much. And maybe because I had worked in radio before, I knew that there are certain must-dos you have in covering a community and the kinds of issues that were important.
But, it was the greatest place in the world to work. It was fabulous. It was motivating. You wake up in the morning jazzed, absolutely jazzed, taking a shower. What am I going to do today?
Arch would come on after the noon news, for example, and offer a personal commentary, sometimes on the news, sometimes just on a subject that interested him. You knew that he wasn't just trying to, in fact, he really wasn't deliberately trying to entertain you. He was thinking about something and he wanted to tell you what he was thinking. Arch was a thinking man's radio station operator.
I felt that there was a case where I could be the voice of the station, the community. And I found that a lot of people said, I really like to have you on the air doing the news at noon, because that's one way I know that everything is all right. But it did. I felt that was a role that management ought to play.
He still, to this day, has the greatest reading voice I have ever heard. It's not pretentious, it's not these pear-shaped tones, but, when Arch would give his postscript to the news, it was just like a friend talking to you in your ear. It was great.
One of the things I miss when I come home from the beach is the sound of the surf, but not anymore. I brought some with me. Sometimes eternal truths manifest themselves while you're on vacation in a cottage at the beach. Ants in the kitchen tend to make you a neater housekeeper. Ants eaten in moderation don't seem to affect the taste of food very much.
Those were pieces of art, audio art that he did every day. And he always had such a wonderful, precise, descriptive way of expressing activities or actions or people.
There was a man who had died who worked for the town of Orange, riding on the back of a trash truck. And Arch detailed this man's life and what he did, and you would have thought MacArthur had died. And the guy spent his life riding on the back of a trash truck. But that was Arch's gift.
I like doing those because, as you know from another old saying is that a lady particularly is only in the news 3 times: when she is born, when she gets married, and when she dies. And a lot of people are in the same category in a community like Orange. They were mainly, when they died was when they were in the news. And so I wanted to recognize the contributions of people. Some were great, others were just nice, humble, get-along folks. So that was the idea of the postscript to go along with the news. And it made a nice little complete package. And sometimes it'd go on for a long, long time.
In a community where one of the week's big social events was the high school football game, sports news, whether from the local schools, the University of Virginia, or the news of the Washington Redskins, was of great importance. WJMA again met the needs of its listeners.
So we were doing a ton of different stuff. Just thank God Arch let us do it, I guess. It was, it certainly was a lot of sports. But I don't think music at the station was ever the primary thing. It was about the news, about the people, and sports was all about the people.
When I started doing sports, Claude White was the general manager at that time when I'd come back from school. That's when I did my first basketball game. Bill Little did the color.
In June of '60, as I say, that's when I started, and the Orange football started in September. And they didn't have anybody to do it.
Indeed, it seemed the majority of the station's listeners loved sports. The Washington Redskins games were popular. The high school football games were an obsession.
We had people back at the station that did yeoman work. They would call other stations and get scores and feed them to us. We even went through a stretch there where we had people that were out at other games that would call in live updates during our timeouts. That was quite something no one else was really doing. Or we would tape them and play them in sections. And all that was tough to manage, and we always worried about how it sounded. Did it flow well? I can remember doing 2 games on one night, like an AM game and an FM game at the same time, or tape delaying games where we played one right after the other, or one on a Saturday morning.
They give it though on the inside. No, they're going to rush on the outside. It's going to be Jackson on the end around. Touchdown! Oh, some nice faking inside. Tom, you saw it all the way, but Jackson.
I remember doing 2 games in one night. And then we did, I think Madison was in a big game with maybe William Monroe. So because we were regionalized, we broadcast on the FM the William Monroe High School in Greene County against Madison. But we also had the Orange High School game on the AM.
And I don't know that Arch himself was all that interested in sports, but he knew the audience was. So if it was important to the audience, it was important to Arch.
When we would do a game, people would comment about how great a job we were doing. But I really like the way you guys do your sports coverage. It brings more to us that can't get to the game. That meant more to me, and I'm sure to Clint as well, than the award we got in 1983.
The news had been so strong at this station. It was they'd received all these awards, and I can remember Tom when he first came on board, and he said, we're going to win one of those awards.
You look up on the wall, and you see all these awards. And we looked up there, and I said, why can't we do that? We had already regionalized JMA, and we had already done that with our news department. So it was a logical step for Clint and I to just say, why can't we do this with sports?
There was a few of us that were kind of helping out at that time, and he actually created a group of people that he knew. He had a Madison contact, I think Barry Penholler and Sue Jarrett out at Woodbury Forest, because we were trying to include Woodbury as part of our, at least, information. And George Fletcher, who was the minister of the Montford, I want to remember the church, but it's out in Montford. He was a minister there, lived in town. And myself, and he told us, I remember when he got us together, he said, we want to win one of those awards. And he took it personal.
Probably one of the first sports groups to have a woman reporter. And that was back in 1980.
We were just the fluff. We were the ideas. We throw them on the table. I had no idea whether they could go or not, and there would be the other people that would kind of make it happen.
In one game, we had a sideline reporter on the Orange side. We had a sideline reporter on the Madison side at Porterfield Park. And we had the referees mic'd.
Madison will have the ball at the 44-yard line. George Fletcher, down on the field to you.
Tom, I think Madison might have gotten a break there. They had a receiver over on this side. Central did wide open. Bailey couldn't see him, and he ended up fumbling.
Now, no small market radio station's doing that. No medium-sized stations doing that for your local high school sports. And a lot of stations aren't even doing that on the college level. So we were a little bit ahead of our time.
A lot of it was just ideas. It was things that wouldn't that be neat if we could? And then we'd kind of set off and we'd talk to the Gene Bossus or Lenny Cowards, or is there some way we could do this? Lenny was always so funny. Well, yeah, but...
There's no question about the fact you can do that, but you're going to have to get Arch to pay for it.
Always money. Always a concern. How could Harrison balance the economic realities of selling advertising in a small town while still offering an informative, quality product, something he considered useful to his listeners? Some programming seemed to sell itself. Others presented more of a challenge.
The things that were easiest to sell for me was sports. And Orange we never had a problem selling Orange High football. But then when basketball season came along, we couldn't sell it, or they told me they couldn't sell it because Orange was terrible in basketball. So nobody wanted to buy it. And that's when we got the idea, after Arch came, of selling it in a group.
Rather than placing ads on a specific sports broadcast, a sponsor was asked to join a pool of advertisers, the Sports Broadcasters Club, for a fixed amount of money per month. The pool of advertisers sponsored all of WJMA's sports broadcasts. Their commercials ran in rotation during games and sports news reports, assuring them exposure. The program assured Harrison a steady revenue stream.
I think that the Sports Broadcasters Club really saved us, because we had an income flow that was reliable. Because if it was a sports show, Bill Little could sell anything. So the scores from the 1926 World Series, if necessary. Now he loved sports.
Maybe it's because I was always interested in sports, and because it was easy for me to sell sports, and because of that, we made a good impression on the community sports-wise, knowing that we did all the local stuff. I mean, I don't know of any radio stations almost that broadcast a Little League and do all these things, but we did. And people liked it, so we did it.
We started out, we did the games for nothing. Absolutely nothing. And then I can remember where we split $7.50 between us. And at some point it got to be $15 that we split two ways. There was $7.50. We thought we had reached the big time. Probably didn't pay for our meal when we went on the road somewhere, because you drove your own car. There was no reimbursement for gas at that particular point. Later on, of course, that changed somewhat too, but you did it because you wanted to do it.
People don't get into the radio business without motivation. The motivation arises from many sources: technical interest, passion about news or sports, even the desire to become a local celebrity. To be a success, Harrison needed to make sure that in addition to personal motivation, a new job applicant also possessed the talent and intelligence to be successful. Making the decision on a person's qualifications for a job at WJMA seemed as much of an art as a business skill.
I used to use ads in Broadcasting Magazine, which was something like that. We can't promise you whatever it was, but we'll give you a good opportunity to learn something in a nice, small, congenial, small market station.
So I'm really grateful for the station being here, and I'm extremely grateful for Arch for taking the chance. Because had I seen me back in 1973, I would have thrown me out and not looked twice. And Arch looked past all that. And there was something that Arch saw that he wanted to go ahead and work with it. And so, and everything that I ever achieved in radio, I got because I got my ground, I got my roots here.
First of all, I'm amazed that I was ever hired because I still have my original tape. It sounds like my vocal cords are frozen. I mean, it's just this horrible monotone and this kind of, and I wonder how did Arch ever see anything in that? If I'd have been in his shoes, I think I'd have patted the boy on the head and told him to go get a job on a farm or something, because you definitely don't want to do radio announcing.
I walked in one day and met Pat Watson, and I walked in the front door, the green tile floor that sat in front of her desk, and she looked up over her glasses and said, "What can we do for you?"
And Arch came walking out, and it's just music to my ears. He says, "So, I understand you might be the answer to our prayers." Looking over him. Oh, me?
And I have to say that in no other job I've had have I found anybody who was quite as inspiring or as well regarded as Arch was.
He was a good reader of people. I mean, I can't say enough. I don't think this guy ever really beat me up about anything. It's like, again, he was always interested in his people.
Yeah, he was one of a kind. I never, in all my days in radio, I never really met another guy like him.
There's nothing worse than bosses who only point out what's wrong and never give you an attaboy. And I certainly never felt that. I felt that I was appreciated.
You're going to mess up. Don't worry about it. That's part of you're going to go on the air and you're going to mess something up. That's going to happen. Just try not to let it happen again. Learn from your mistakes and be prepared.
I don't think during the stretch with JMA anybody was particularly afraid. I know I wasn't, to make a mistake. We didn't like making mistakes, but we were never afraid to make a mistake. And thus, I think because when you're not afraid, then that whole creative side comes out in people, and it's what makes it kind of special. The environment for doing that anymore, I don't know that it exists. If it does, I'd love to find it. And I think that's why the memories stay so fresh in your mind.
I have a feeling that Arch was, cultivating, he was just looking for people that had some sort of intellectual fundament, had some sort of a bottom to them.
I felt getting the best people you could get, tell them roughly what you wanted it done, and then let them go to it.
People were willing to give somebody a chance. And they knew you could contribute something, and it was great. Whatever you gave them was wonderful. You never felt like it wasn't appropriate. And that was true throughout the whole station experience.
People took pride in what they were doing, and you didn't just, and I don't say this was 100% of the time, because there's always people who get in a hurry, but the overriding sense you got there was it wasn't good enough to just throw it up against the wall. You did it until you got it right, and you took pride in what you did.
Mainly, I believe it evolved from the input of this very solid, reliable staff that we had. People who were not afraid to express ideas, who had good ideas, and we could work with them. I believe the whole thing seemed to me a kind of a learning experience. I never came and said, "This is what we're going to do." We just sort of said, that sounds like a good idea. We're going to give that a try.
Arch was a real different kind of manager. He was a manager in the sense that, like an Army general, he wasn't like a captain or a lieutenant. I mean, he would talk with you about some ideas, but basically it was up to you to do and you would go to him with the ideas.
We didn't have much turnover. And Arch hated turnover. I recall him telling me, perhaps when I was tendering my resignation once, he said, this is the hardest part of this job, is losing people and having to find somebody else that will fill the slot. He says, I just don't like that part of the job.
Arch was great. He was like, I don't know, like right out of a fairy tale or something. He'd just kind of putter around in his cardigan sweater and, just get here and there. But he was really hands-off, unless you kind of screwed up. And then he would sort of point you back in the right direction. But it's as if he had the wisdom to just let the crazies run the asylum, I mean, he was very much in control. It was, no question Arch was the boss. But he didn't meddle. He just had his nice glasses and his gray beard and his red cardigan sweater, and he'd just putter around and make everybody feel, very at home.
My role really in this has been to be a teacher. I certainly was not a gung-ho, sales-driven person. I just was a teacher. And if they understood that and we got along fine, I wasn't going to issue any grades. I don't think I've fired more than one person that I can think of, and it wasn't the case of, you're fired, clean out your desk, because the guy that did it, he said, I wondered why you hadn't fired me before.
The line that later I shared in conversations with Mitzi Clark and Barbara Potter and Odebear, we talked about Arch Harrison. And the one common thing we could also say about him was this was a man who had class. And we wanted to be a part of that operation.
I would say that in general, I never met as many intellectually interesting cases under one roof as I did at JMA. There were just a lot of really interesting types there at JMA. In radio, I met a lot of potheads and alcoholics. There's Commander Cody has a new album called Dopers, Drunks, and Everyday Losers, and it reminds me of a lot of stations I've worked at. So JMA may have given me a little bit of a unrealistic notion of what radio was like.
When Arch Harrison came to WJMA in the 1960s, the broadcasting industry's working population was primarily white males. As the country dealt with the turmoil of securing fundamental human and civil rights for people of all genders and colors, the atmosphere at WJMA remained calm and quiet. Without strife or protests of any kind, WJMA's staff makeup gently evolved on the leading edge of a new wave in America.
I think he knew he was taking a chance. He never had a woman on the air, at least not to cover a full air shift. I think he may have had some women who did news and things.
He was great. We had a good relationship. I don't know why, but we just clicked along, and he was very patient with me, extremely. Well, he's been that way all along, I think, with everybody.
Here were these perfectly competent, intelligent people. Why shouldn't they, if they wanted to do some broadcasting, come on in? I didn't even consider it groundbreaking, for heaven's sakes. It was just a good idea.
He did not look at me as a difference in color. He looked at what I wanted to do and whether I was willing to put the work in to do it. Because if I was willing to do the work, he was willing to work with me on it. I didn't do it to represent anybody. I did it because it looked like it would be fun. And later on I realized the importance of it, because Arch opened a door that, and it wasn't because he had any policy against it. Nobody had ever asked. Nobody had come and asked. Because I think that had somebody else come in with the same ability, they would have been first.
Bob started with me as a high school part-timer. He was a really good-spirited man. He was. A good sense of humor. He also had a very clear speaking voice. Didn't have any accent of any sort. It just was really, really good.
The time I spend here at WJMA is probably going to be what I'm going to consider to be the best times of my life.
The 1970s was a new time with new ideas, new people, and new equipment. Harrison needed a new engineer. In fact, he reached a point where he was almost in a maintenance crisis. He called upon a man to come out of retirement and to the rescue at WJMA. A man who had begun tinkering with radios not long after Marconi broadcast the first wireless signal across the ocean in 1899.
So he came in the front door with his box of tools, kind of shuffling along like that. Man, I just knew that heaven had smiled on us in the form of Gene Bussoud. He was a tenacious engineer. If we had a problem at sign-on, we called Gene. If he couldn't fix it by telephone, he'd be over as soon as he could to nose around and find out what was going wrong.
I couldn't get the FM transmitter up one morning. And Gene, I called him, and I said, Gene, the FM transmitter won't come on. He says, open the door. I said, okay. Look down at the bottom. Do you see 3 black boxes down there? I said, yeah. Count over 3 and hit that box. So I counted over 3 and I tapped it. He said, no, I didn't hear you. You really hit it. So I hit it and you could hear the relay snap and the things just came up and everything was fine.
I didn't ever have to worry about engineering after Gene came and joined us, because I knew that we would be in good shape.
He was wonderful to work with. And he had no... I think you get to a certain age, and he had reached that age, he wasn't trying to prove anything, he'd already proven it. And so if this young upstart came in, he was just glad to have the help. That's the sense I got out of it. And I think that once in 1,000 times maybe I told him something he didn't know. I mean, we both enjoyed that. It was that type of thing. It was a remarkable experience.
He was a sweet man. He was so quiet. He would come in and do his whatever technical work.
At that time, all of us who worked there were pretty young and lively and high energy and running all over the place, drinking 10 cups of coffee a day. So there was a lot of hustle and bustle around. And then there was Gene, who he was just very slow and steady and methodical.
Gene Basu was getting on in years. He was a tall man. He moved in a motion similar to a combination of Tim Conway on the Carol Burnett Show and Lurch on the Addams Family.
He was getting up there. He was pretty old and slow, but he'd be fixing this or fixing that, and a very nice man.
I do remember talking to him one time and asking him how he got interested in radio, how he got into the radio business. He said, well, when I was a kid, a friend of mine told me you could talk down the block without a wire.
Like probably a lot of our parents, he was definitely somebody who came of age during the Depression, and so he was not going to spend any money needlessly. And he would find a way to fix that equipment with taking parts out of other pieces of equipment or duct taping things together. He was really a magician in the way he kept the station running.
Gene Basu, with his decades of experience, kept the station's signal on the air strong and clear. But at times it seemed that WJMA ran not on electrons, but on mountains of paper. To deal with this challenge, another station hero emerged in the form of Pat Watson.
Pat had been working in a grocery store up on Main Street, and I needed somebody to come and work in the radio station. And before she could come on the job, she was working in the butcher shop of this Orange Deli or something like that, chopped off a piece of one of her fingers. Did that stop Pat? No! She was there with her finger all wrapped up in it, pecking away like that, and she never stopped. And that was what was really tenacious about her, was that she was a solid old country gal, and she just knew this is what she would like to do, and she did it for years and years and years, and knew everybody.
But don't get on her bad side. I got on her bad side for 1 week, and it was a miserable week. But Pat and I really got along well. We got along great, and she was so funny to Phil Goodman. And Phil has his stories, which he will tell you.
You went through 3 stages with Pat. The first stage was when she was breaking you in and you were new, and she would use your first name. She would say, Phil, this is not the way I need it. I need it this other way. Would you please do it this way because it makes it easier for me? Second stage was, Phil, we've talked about this. I've said it before. I say it now. Do it this way. Third stage of Watson was, Gooden, get up here. I got a bone to pick with you.
Oh, Pat was a character. Just a wonderful character. She knew how to run that thing with her eyes shut. Everything about that station she was in on, and she would just tell everybody what to do, when to do it, and how to do it. And She didn't care if she stepped on your toes or not.
And would tell me if we had screwed up in somebody's name, we didn't get a play right, she would let us know that, you should have done this.
On the whole, we got along very well, and I really admired her for her concern. She had a passion for that place, I would call it. She wanted everything right.
Patricia McCarver recalls doing a very fine, thoughtful story about Madison County. And when she came out of the control room, Pat said, "McCarver, what in the hell did that mean?" And that was, hey, fine. That was Pat all over. She was a really thoughtful, good-hearted woman. And she just was the heart and soul of that part of the station.
Do you know where is? I remember doing a story about that one time. Maybe that was the one that Pat Watson said, "What the hell was that all about?"
She'd tell you what she thought, and if it wasn't good, well, that's just what she thought. And I like that. I like people being honest and upfront and stuff like that.
As you know, Pat was not one to mince words, and if she had some opinion about something you had done or something you had said, she'd let you know in a heartbeat. And her judgment was usually right on. So I grew to respect her a lot.
Jay Kiernan holds an award that I used to hold, and I hope that I will never hold again. I forget the newscast, but I do remember I stumbled through the entire thing from the beginning to the end. And she looked at me and said, "Gooden, that was the worst damn newscast I have ever heard in my life." And of course I was confident that, nobody would ever beat that.
And then I get to the part where it says, among the gunman's demands were that all white people leave the earth within 7 days. What can I do? And I fell out. That was it. Started the next record, and Pat Watson, as sweet as she always was, she came into the control room and gave me a look like, you moron. And she says, "Cannon, that was the worst newscast I ever heard."
And I guess she called me Robert. She called everybody by their last name, but I have no recollection of Pat and I ever having a head-to-head confrontation or Pat being particularly critical of my program. I don't think she liked it, so she didn't listen to it.
I remember frequently seeing Pat working at her desk with her head down, working on paper or typing or something. And you would play a piece of music you knew Pat liked, and you would see her hand just reach up and turn up the monitor. And one thing that would always get Pat to turn up the monitor was a Conway Twitty song. Never failed.
Arch had given her some work to do, and it was right toward the end of the day, and she liked to get out of there at times. And she was giving him up and down the river right there in the front office. And of course, me being a big mouth, I came out and said, "Pat, you can't do that. He's the owner." He said, "I don't give a damn if he is the owner. He knows better than this."
When she got sick, I guess by that time I had left the station, but I remember calling on her in the hospital one time, and her old beau, Roger, had said, I don't know whether we're going to lick this thing or not, but we're going to give it a try. And so I went to see Pat. I wanted to see her. I wanted to tell her how much she had meant to me personally and to the station as a whole and to the community as a whole. She is really something special. So when she died, the funeral service was attended by half the town over at Preddy's funeral home. It was just a swarm of people there. It was just great.
After 25 years, Harrison finally did move on from WJMA, which in the 1970s became styled as Radio Orange. He didn't move up to a larger radio station in a bigger town as he thought he would when he came to WJMA back in 1961. Instead, he moved into retirement. In 1984, he sold WJMA to Digby Solomon, who would take the station into its next chapter and the new era of deregulated radio. For Harrison and the others involved in WJMA's first 4 decades, all the years of action and creativity, all the years of being the community's informed friend, soon became a collection of memories.
People remember so well that period, and I'm rewarded by that. And they understand when I said, I just can't do it. Things have changed so much that I don't know wouldn't know how to begin. And we won some nice prizes, and there's that nice picture of everybody over in the hotel in Fredericksburg. And that was Ann Pritchett at the time, had just come to work on the sales staff, and she was just astounded that this was what this radio station did. The awards that were given for excellence were really, really heartening and rewarding. So people liked us. That's the main thing, and it was a joy. It really was. But I think it was time to leave when we left, and at times I really miss it. But that is not something that hangs over me all the time.
It is a source of common experiences and common knowledge. And certainly one of the characteristics of a community is that there's at least a certain base of knowledge that is common to virtually everyone who lives in that community. It's part of the glue that binds them together, so it's not just a bunch of isolated individuals. And certainly a radio station does that.
We were doing things, probably if the bottom line had been the only arbiter of what would have been aired, we were doing some things probably that would not have made the cut. Well, I think we were doing them because Arch thought that they were just good to do. They were good for the community.
But I think that it certainly helps to keep our community informed. We need to know what's going on in our community. But I think that people in the community ought to know what our Board of Supervisors is doing and what our town council is doing.
But that station over here has been a blessing, I'm telling you. You could lose something, put it on the radio, and they'd tell it. Animal get lost, they always find it. It's had a lot of benefits to it, I will tell you that. Yeah, that's been one of the greatest things that ever happened in Orange, right?
There was a lot of great stuff to come out of Spicer's Mill Road in Orange, Virginia. And I was given the opportunity to be part of that. And I took a lot of Arch's philosophies with me everywhere I went.
I don't know at the time I realized how good it was, but the farther I get away from it, the more I realized that it was really a special time and a place. And I don't know that we'll ever get back there again, or that we even should. But it existed at a time. We've moved on.
You know, as I said, as I remember it as a kind of Grover's Corners. So at the time, I don't think I was thinking of it that way. I thought that, this is the way all towns are. But as I look back on it, I realized how different it was and how different JMA was from many local radio stations.
I don't know if it was a time period or how that culture was created, but I haven't found it since. So yeah, I'd like to go back to Brigadoon.
I just had a real good time. And when I can have friends who remember, and remember more than I can remember, that's really wonderful.
you.